In fact, the conflict of whether Ashitaka can survive as a human or become a Tatari god is another substructure that's hidden in the story. Now when Ashitaka is told to show the wound on his arm and takes off the bandage, this is how the wound looks like. In a cut that shows his arm with scars, you can also see Jomon pottery drawn in the background in the obvious way. By showing the Jomon pottery, Miyazaki is saying they're Jomon people, okay? But there is one more function to this. The winding scar on Ashitaka's arm, the pattern of Jomon pottery, and the snaky stuff crawling all over the Tatari god's body all look alike. And Deidarabachi, or the Night Walker, who comes out in the climax, also has these Jomon patterns wriggling inside its body. If you see the character reference, it says, the Night Walker looks like the night sky is walking. It also resembles a walking Jomon pottery. What I'm trying to say is that we unconsciously see Ashitaka's cursed arm and think it's making him suffer or he's gonna die soon because of it. But the pattern of the scar that we see with the pottery is actually the signature of Jomon gods. In other words, it is a sign that Ashitaka is cursed, but at the same time also given a stigma by the gods. He of course becomes a Tatari god because of this curse, but he also gains superpower. After receiving this bruise, the wise woman starts calling Ashitaka Ashitaka Hiko. This Hiko is the honorific title given to an ancient prince. The wise woman is the religious leader of this country, in short, so she acknowledged that Ashitaka Hiko is the one who will be the future leader of this country. In other words, Princess Mononoke is a story where a future king of the country is given a curse that can also be a stigma. Ashitaka has no choice but to leave the village because he is cursed. So he cuts off his top knot. All the men in the village have top knots on their heads, but Ashitaka cuts it off. By the way, I'm just assuming that, of course, everybody has already watched Princess Mononoke many times. That's okay, right? Okay, so here, it's a scene where Ashitaka cuts off his top knot, but do you see how he's using a tiny sword? The sword is probably made of the only iron available in the country. Their standard of civilization should be somewhere between Stone Age and Bronze Age cultures. The large sword-like weapon that Ashitaka later takes with him on his journey, and the large swords that the village girls draw to fight the Tatari god are called woodman's hatchet, which are made of bronze. They're like between a cane and a sword used to cut off distracting ivies when travelers walk in the mountains. They only have bronze culture, so anything made of iron must be very small. It is because there shouldn't be any forest near the village if anyone tries to forge such huge amount of iron, enough for all villagers to own ironware as large as swords. You have to cut so many trees, that's why there's a saying, you need a whole mountain to forge 5 tons of iron. Considering where they live, the only ironware they can make must be a small sword made by somehow melting iron sand in a low temperature, forming a shape with it and sharpening it. That's the kind of civilization they live in. So Ashitaka uses that iron sword to cut off his top knot. The action indicates that he is no longer a member of the family, equals he can never come back home. And the wise woman explains why he has to do it. Here, please pay attention to the expression of the wise woman. She says, there's evil at work in the land to the west. Prince Ashitaka, it's your fate to go there and see what you can see with eyes unclouded by hate. You may find a way to lift the curse. After hearing these words, Ashitaka decides to go west. At the same time, we are also somehow convinced, or should I say, deceived by them. Why does Ashitaka have to leave the village in the first place? And why is the wise woman trying to make Ashitaka go west? I mean, she's saying, you may find a way to break the curse, but I was thinking, how does she know that? That's the first important point of the movie. Ashitaka is cursed and his right arm is scarred. This poison will eventually reach the bones and kill him, so he travels west to escape death. We have been forced into thinking that's how this story goes just until now. But if that's the case, there's no need to exile him in the first place. Because the wise woman says, we will make a tomb at where Tatari god died and pray for its soul. Well, you might think, no, that's not gonna work. Because the monster said, I will continue to curse you even after I die. However, in this movie, there are many gods such as the god of dogs or wild boars, but none of them actually curses after death. All the gods who come out in the movies certainly have huge powers, and they're all big, but that's it. They can't use any supernatural power like telepathy. Well, only the forest spirit has this mysterious power, but there's no depiction that other gods have such thing. And there isn't a single scene where dead gods leave curses that continue after death. Both Okoto and Moro die in the movie, but nothing happens afterwards. So there's no curse after death in this fictional world. Then why is Ashitaka exiled? There's only one answer. It's because the wise woman wants to exile him. The reason why the wise woman talks to Ashitaka about the curse in such a poker face is because she's acting. Neither the villagers nor Ashitaka notice it, but there is an unspoken intention only in her mind. The real consequence of Ashitaka's curse is not that he dies, but he becomes another Tatari god. From this point, Ashitaka is slowly turning into a Tatari god. Just like the monster that has attacked the village a little while ago, his pain and suffering gradually becomes unbearable and he begins to curse his fate. The wild boar god who attacks the village also must have controlled the curse with his reason at first, but gradually becomes the Tatari god. In the same manner, Ashitaka is destined to be the next Tatari god. Later, in a battle, he shoots his arrow normally, but he shows a monstrous power, and the arrow tears off the opponent's samurai's both arms. When he shoots the next arrow, it easily chops off the opponent's head, which surprises Ashitaka himself. This is because at this point he's given a sacred power which is also cursed. The power of the curse invites Ashitaka to a suffering that leads to death, while the sacred power increases his strength infinitely. Also in Irontown, he carries wounded son and says, "Out of my way, I'm going." Then he pushes a huge wooden gate open with one hand, which usually requires dozens of people to open. Again, he does it with his cursed right hand. This means when Ashitaka feels anger or sadness or something illogical, he gains infinite power. We only see scenes where Ashitaka manages to control and uses his infinite power at will and think that's all there is. But they definitely portray the process of Ashitaka gradually becoming a monster. In fact, the conflict of whether Ashitaka can survive as a human or become a Tatari god is another substructure that's hidden in the story. However, it is now very noticeable. After all, I think why people can't notice it is because the movie was titled Princess Mononoke, which made the piece look like a romance movie. But it's not a romance. It's a story about Ashitaka. It's really the legend of Ashitaka. Ashitaka has despair and anger in his mind, but on the surface, he shows no emotion and acts gently. And Miyazaki said that in this movie he decided not to portray Ashitaka's inner despair and anger. The reason for that is because while he was making the movie, he talked to Ryotaro Shiba, a novelist, and was deeply impressed by what Shiba said, and thought, "I get it! People who complain so easily are wimps! Now I see why I hate Hideaki Anno's Evangelion. The tiny little wimp keeps on whining, 'I'm unfortunate, I'm unfortunate.'" Shiba told him, "People who are truly unfortunate do not whine, but they rather become well-mannered." Miyazaki was so impressed and that became the inspiration. That's why Ashitaka's inner voices are not spoken through lines, unlike Dora in Castle in the Sky who speaks to herself. This might be more convenient. As a result, the depiction of Ashitaka progressively becoming a monster is shown through pictures, but we somehow see that as a superhero using superpower. But that's not how it should be seen. There's a scene where Ashitaka bends the opponent's sword with just one finger, and at the end breaks it with his thumb and index finger. But that expression clearly shows how his anger goes out of control and becomes monstrous. At first, Ashitaka also calms down and controls his mind. Even when he's told rudely to leave the village, he just sighs and says, okay. But in the latter half of the movie, his power goes out of his control more and more when he becomes emotional. And the wise woman is the only person in the village who notices it. It is not the dead Tatari god that she is afraid of. It is Ashitaka who would one day lose human nature and turns into a Tatari god that she's most afraid of. That's why she thinks Ashitaka is a good boy and would have taken over our village and become a good king. But now he will become a monster because of the pain and resentment and the anger towards the absurdity that has descended upon him. Let's kick him out of the village before that happens. On top of that, the wise woman plans to send this young man who will become a Tatari god to the king of Yamato in the west, who imposed a curse on our village. Jomon people thought that curses were something that must be given back to someone. They called it imigaeshi, a type of retaliation. It was a rule between uncivilized tribes that if they received hatred from others, they would curse them back. This rule became more systematized during Heian era and was called Shikigami Gaeshi, or returning of fierce god. So the wise woman, with her perfect poker face, operates a retaliation against the country of Yamato in the west by sending Ashitaka as a strategic weapon. But neither Ashitaka nor the villagers are aware of this at all. So Ashitaka believes, if I go west, I may be able to remove the curse, and thinks, I have to prevent the village from further infection of the curse. Therefore, he doesn't realize that he is now the curse itself. Ashitaka doesn't know at this point that after a few weeks or months, he too becomes a Tatari god, has strange snake-like stuff clinging on his body, and attacks the country in the west. In this movie, there's one more person who may be noticing what the wise woman notices. That's Jigo, who appears a little later in the story, a complex old man who seems to have many secrets. When Ashitaka first meets Jiko, Ashitaka tells him, this iron bullet was inside a wild boar. Because of that, I received a curse. Jiko stares at Ashitaka for a while and suddenly says, from here, go to the west end and go even farther west. Then, there's a great god in the mountains. If you meet that god, your curse may disappear. This must mean that Jiko also thinks of attacking and defeating the Nightwalker, a big monster with Ashitaka, who is now also a big monster. So you can see the true intentions in Princess Mononoke are hard to read, because the movie does not clarify the thoughts or strategies of each individual, but is designed in a way that makes the viewer see the story only from Ashitaka's point of view.